So in this video, I'm going to go through using selective adjustments. And selective adjustments are when you want to take one part of the image and adjust something like exposure or color balance in one small area, but not the whole image. And doing selective adjustments requires you to first do your global adjustments on your image before you jump into the selective adjustment panel. So I'm going to start with this one as my sample image, and what you might notice over here on my basics panel is that I have adjusted for the temperature and the tint slightly for the color balance. I've increased the exposure a little bit. I haven't touched the contrast slider. I brought down the highlights to get more information in the brightest part of my image. I went a little bit brighter with my shadow areas. Even though I went down with my highlights, I then kind of boosted up the whitest white of the image and then brought my blacks down a little bit for a little bit more sense of depth in the darkest parts of the shadows. And I'm going to show you what this looked like before and after the global adjustments. So this is after, and then this is before. And you can also notice a shift when I go to the before and after of my lens correction and the chromatic aberrations as well. So when I am looking at this image, I might want to make some more changes to it. So for example, the light that's hitting the background is different than the light that's hitting the foreground because the foreground's in the shadow. So if I want to do a selective adjustment, I would click on this option right here, which brings up a panel that looks similar to the global adjustments panel. And it gives me the option again to change the temp and tint and exposure, etc. The first thing to do if you are not quite yet sure what exposure or what adjustment you want to make is to double click on where it says effect, and that will set all of these back to 0, and then you can sort of decide, okay, what is it that I actually want to do to this image. So for this particular sample, I might decide that I want to actually brighten up a little bit more of the tree trunk, but not the foreground and not the background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the exposure and I'm going to bring this up, maybe just for now, to like 0.24. And you'll notice that when I bring my cursor over the image, I have a circle and another circle and a plus. And what this is indicating is the size of the brush that will brush on that change. And I can change the size of the brush with the keyboard shortcut of your bracket keys. So the bracket keys changes the size of the brush. And the main brush is the middle circle. The outer circle is where it kind of feathers out to and extends to where that adjustment will stop. And you usually do want a little bit of a feather, otherwise it would look very obvious where you've painted in a selective adjustment. But if you want to change the size of the feather itself, you also use the bracket keys, but you hold down your shift button. So to know how much feathering you need is just something that you kind of have to practice with, and even how big the brush really needs to be in relation to that feather just takes a little bit of practice. But I'm going to go ahead, and I have the plus right now, which means that this will be adding this change, and I can't see a really big difference. It's pretty subtle, but the nice thing is that with Lightroom I can just come over here with my sliders and bring those to a different position and now see that within the context of this particular change. Now if I end up going too far in an area that I don't want to lighten, so for example I end up inadvertently going into this background area, the keyboard shortcut to change that from a plus brush to basically deleting whatever mask you just created is the Alt key. So holding down the Alt key changes this from a plus to a minus. And you'll notice that your brush size is different when you go sometimes between those. So to change the brush size when it's in the minus mode is to hold down that Alt key and then just use my bracket keys again to adjust my brush size and my feathering if necessary. And then I can go in and I can delete in that area that I didn't really mean to go into. And so this particular example, I am using the exposure to adjust, But if I wanted to then do another adjustment, so let's say I want to change the color balance here of this background, what I actually need to do then is to create a new brush mask. And so what we can see if we hold our cursor over that black dot that was created, I can see that mask where I've increased the exposure. But now I want to work over here in the background, and I'm actually going to make this a little bit warmer in this background area, a little less green. What I would do is I would need to hit New over here to create a new mask, and therefore a mask that can be controlled with different effects here in the adjustment panel. So if I hit New, what will happen to that dot here is that it'll turn gray, which means that that is currently an inactive mask. It's still there and it's still applied, but if I start to brush and create a new mask, it will be a separate kind of mask layer. So I currently have, I want to change the color back here, but right now I have this exposure adjusted because that's what I last used. I can always reset this again by double-clicking the effects and go back to 0. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this a little bit more magenta, and then I'm going to increase my brush size a little bit, and I'm going to adjust the color of the background. Again, this is really, really subtle this first time I did it. So if I want to see it a little bit more extreme, I could bring that slider all the way over. If I bring it all the way over, I really see that it starts to get pink. But maybe I just want to go somewhere kind of halfway in between. And then I could decide, you know, I like the color balance right now, but I also maybe want to make that a little bit, let's say, lighter or darker. What I can do is within this one mask that I'm currently working on, and again it's indicated now by that dot being black, is I can then change multiple factors here on this particular mask. So I did the color balance first, and then I could also lighten or darken that one as well within that single mask if I need to. So you can have as many kind of layer masks going here as you want to. These dots are going to indicate again which one is active and which one is inactive. And if I want to go back to an inactive dot and mask and continue to edit it, I just click on it so that now it's indicating that I'd be working on this here where I was increasing the exposure on the tree, and I can add and subtract now to that. So what you'll notice then is if I feel like I'm done with my selective adjustments in the adjustment brush panel, then I can click on this icon right here, which will take me back to the basics panel, and those dots will go away. And you don't see the selective adjustment dots unless you actually have the adjustment panel options open.